Welcome to the very first attempt at documenting a project here in the Lounge Logic shop. I wish this was going to be one of those projects that's one of the crazier things that we do for special events, but thanks to COVID-19, we don't have any special event business right now. But what we do have is a really cool conference table build for Echo Media Group here in Tustin, California. And I hope that maybe some of this information helps you with some of your projects, or you just enjoy watching the video. The main thing is, I hope this doesn't suck.
So here we go. The base frame of this table will be made out of 2-inch hot rolled steel square tube with a 1/8 inch sidewall. We start off by cutting all the pieces to length on the chop saw, then weld together the two frame sections that will make up the ends of the base. After the frame is assembled, we prepped it for primer by sanding all of the surfaces with 220 grit sandpaper and then wiped it down with acetone. The tabletop will be made out of 8/4 poplar, which we picked out at Austin Hardwoods here in Santa Ana. Since the poplar pieces were too long to fit into the bed of our pickup truck, Austin delivered them to us on one of their trucks, which saved a lot of headache. Once we had the pieces laid out on the table, we arranged them next to each other to find the order where the overall coloring and the grain of the wood matched up the best. These pieces are S3S, which stands for Surface 3 Sides. What that really means is the top and bottom face have already been run through a planer in order to make the surface flat. Then one edge is ripped straight, and in theory, it's squared. The ripped edge isn't always perfect, but definitely serves as a great starting point. The overall size of the top is going to be 4 foot by 12 foot. Here I'm making notes on each board to remember how much to trim off. After the final width of each board is figured out, we ran each of them through the table saw, with the manufacturer edge against the guide.
This is normally where a joiner would come in really handy, and we had an old Powermatic joiner, but it died. So we're just gonna send them through, use the feather board, and hope that the square edge from the manufacturer is straight enough to pull these things together nice and tight.
Originally this top was gonna be made out of maple, but yet again, thanks to COVID-19, maple was a wood species hard to find here in Southern California, among many other materials that we use all the time. Seriously, if you thought it was hard to find toilet paper a couple months ago, it was even harder to find clear acrylic once everyone decided to make shields at cashier stations.
We're going to join the pieces together using 3/8 inch dowel pins. So once the pieces are all ripped down to the actual width that we're going to use, I take my square, measure out each one of the pin locations, and then draw a line all the way across the table so they line up. After that, I flip the boards on their side and use this amazing self-centering dowel jig to drill the holes on each sides of the boards for the middle, and then just one side for the ends. Everything's lined up, ready to go. We're gonna put the first 3 boards together. Normally on every other project, we would use Type Bond 2. It works just fine for most other things, but when it comes to a big glue up top like this, I definitely wanna go with Type Bond 3. Why? Because 3 is better than 2.
We start by spacing out 1/2 inch pipe clamps on one of our shop tables, then set the middle 3 pieces in order on top of the clamps. We tilt the pieces on their side and add the wood glue in a tight squiggle pattern from one end to the other, as well as inside the dowel holes. Then using a rubber mallet, we gently tap the dowels until they're seated in each hole. Next, we lay the pieces down flat and gradually clamp them together until they touch. Because these are 8/4 pieces and they're about 12 feet long, the 1/2 inch pipe clamps aren't really strong enough to pull them together, so we bring out the 3/4 clamps and the Jorgensen parallel bar clamps to get the pieces nice and tight. To paint the steel base frame, we're going to use a combination of products that we've had a lot of success with. The first is Rust-Oleum's Automotive Primer in the light gray color, followed by Rust-Oleum's Painter's Touch spray paint, and we're using the Canyon Black and the Satin Sheen. And the very last is Rust-Oleum's Clear Enamel. While we wait for the glue to dry on the first 3 pieces, we went ahead and added the primer coating to the steel frame for the bottom of the table. The client wanted to maintain the live edge look on the long sides of this tabletop. So instead of gluing up all the pieces first, I'm doing a lot of the work on the live edge pieces before they're glued up so that it doesn't put stress on the joints. I just took the rasp, started grinding down some of the rougher areas in order for there to be less work for the finish sander. This is a very labor intensive process, and I won't lie to you, I was pretty tired after this. With the live edge pieces sanded down, the next day we went ahead and glued up the final 2 pieces that make up the sides of the tabletop. This is kind of the exciting part of the project because you can really see how the top is coming together, and so far it's looking pretty darn good. Something we didn't film was once we had the last pieces glued up and they had dried for a little bit, we took our skill saw and cut the ends flush. As you can see here, some of the glue got squeezed out of the seam when it was clamped together, which is totally fine. We're going to flip it over and start working on the bottom side first, which is usually the worst side because of gravity. This thing is a monster and it's super heavy, so it took both of us to flip it over. So now Cisco's going over the whole surface with the hand planer to try and clean up the uneven edges and also remove a lot of the wood glue.
Now for the really fun part that's going to take a long time. We have to sand down this entire 4-foot by 12-foot table on both sides, starting off with 120 grit, then we're gonna work our way up to 220. This is probably gonna take a couple hours. Because this top is so big and awkward to move, we're gonna go a little bit out of order. So we're gonna actually put the first coat of finish on the bottom before we even get around to sanding the top side. We're gonna go with a standard polyurethane water base finish on the bottom side. It's gonna seal it, it's gonna keep it protected. There's really no reason to have any extra qualities of durability or anything on the bottom side because no one's ever really gonna touch it.
With one of us on each side of the table, we used foam brushes to apply the polyurethane to the bottom side. We used a pretty liberal amount on the first coat, knowing that we'd be able to sand it down and remove any sort of brush marks, but the next 2 coats we were much more careful with that. While the first coat of the polyurethane was drying, we went back over the steel base and decided to start painting it. We painted it on the bottom side first, then flipped it over and repeated for the top side.
So something I forgot to point out before we painted the frame here, instead of going with a stem caster and a threaded insert on the bottom, we went with a steel plate, mainly because I was concerned that the overall weight of this thing might become a problem with the threads over time, and if those break, gonna take a whole lot more effort in fixing it. So I had these plates made by my buddy Kurt over at Jorgensen Metals here in Santa Ana. He cut them out on the water jet and they turned out absolutely perfect. They're 3/8 thick steel plate. He pre-drilled the holes for the caster hardware. I'm really happy with how they turned out. I think this is the solution for this big of a table.
The casters we'll be using are these 4-inch diameter swivel plate casters I got from McMaster-Carr. Each one is rated for 200 pounds, and they also come with a total lock, which not only stops the wheel from rotating, but it stops the caster from swiveling. The next day, the polyurethane coat had dried on the bottom, so we flipped the tabletop back over and marked out the spots for the power distribution blocks, which I'll get into later on in this video. We used a drill to pre-drill the holes, then used the jigsaw to remove the material. While the top was drying, we noticed that it had started to cup a little bit. So instead of applying the clear coat finish to the top, we decided to mount it to the steel frame first and then apply the final finish. We used 5/16 lag screws to attach the top to the steel frame.
All right, so the time has come for the finish on the top side. Normally what I would use is this product right here. Just a lot of good outcomes with this thing, but apparently this company was recently purchased by Mohawk and they're rebranding the product. So Woodcraft did not have it in stock. Instead, for the very first time, I'm going to try out the General Finishes Enduro VAR in the satin sheen. The most important thing is to make sure that this top coat is gonna be nice and hard because we don't want anybody to like write on the table or something, all of a sudden you can see their notes forever. So we'll see how this guy turns out.
We sanded the top surface with 220 grit just like before, used rags to wipe down any of the extra dust, and then used tack cloths to remove all the dust particles that weren't removed by the rag. As easy as it would be to apply the finish directly from the can, it's always a good idea to pour the amount you need into a separate container so you don't contaminate the rest of the contents of the can. Again, using foam brushes, we applied 3 coats to the top side of the table, sanding in between, and we're cautious of the amount we applied on our final coat.
So we're coming up on the final steps of this 12-foot by 4-foot Poplar conference table. We applied the final coat of finish a couple days ago. We've let it rest for a couple days. I'm really impressed with the way that the EnduroVar product from General Finishes turned out. It's the first time I've actually had to use it, so I wasn't really sure. We did a couple sample pieces, but you never know in the grand scheme of things if a sample is going to be like the big thing. So I'm really happy with it. Now that it's had a couple days to cure, we get to our final step, which is installing these power distribution blocks. These have 3 AC outlets, as you can see, and then 2 USB outlets. And they come pre-wired with 8 feet of AWG cable and a grounded plug. So it's really easy, it's plug and play. We just have to put them in the holes that we cut out, screw them in, they're good to go.
So here's the final result. Over the course of this project, I learned a couple new things. First, some of the poplar we used for this project had very subtle discoloration in spots of the wood, which were about 3 to 4 inch rectangle shapes that were lighter in color than the area around it. And of course, we only noticed after we assembled the top and sanded it. I had never seen this happen before, and the best guess we had was these were marks from the spacers used during the kiln drying process. So from here on out, we're definitely going to carefully look for this when we pick the pieces we don't plan to stain or paint. Fortunately, we built this table during the summertime and were able to leave it outside in the sun for a couple days, which helped even out the coloring. I also discovered that documenting every step of a project takes quite a bit of effort, so I have a newfound respect for everyone else that makes videos like this one.
I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel because we definitely plan on doing more of these. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram @LoungeLogic. Thanks for watching.